back with Cathy too. We're talking about discovering your basic need. We're not talking about, talking about sort of earth, water and fire. We're talking about what it is that you need for yourself after you've defined it. But how do you define it? And what are the trains of habit in your way of thinking that affect or effect the way it actually could work or possibly fail or hopefully succeed? But Cathy, you've got to explain to us that there's two sort of ways that could go if we're talking about habits of the mind.
Absolutely, Adriel. And in looking at our habits that we use on ourselves and others, we can look at disconnecting habits and connecting habits. So when I talk about disconnecting and connecting, it's how do I connect and disconnect or disconnect with myself, and also, really importantly, how do I connect or disconnect with people in relationship, whether it's in family, friends or workplace. And so if we talk about the disconnecting habits, and I've mentioned this before in terms of the external control space, we're talking about criticising, blaming, complaining, nagging, threatening, punishing and bribing for control. These are the behaviours that we have learnt very well from birth, and these are the behaviours that sit very comfortably with an external control space. So it's not my fault, it's someone else's fault. It's I complain continually. Instead of having some gratitude in my life, I will complain continually about everything.
The term bribing for control seems very confronting to some people. What does that actually mean?
Well, another way of looking at it can be rewarding for control. The best example you will see, I think, is anytime you're in a supermarket, see a mum with a pile of kids, and you'll have the little kids who are just throwing a little wobbly because they want something. What we will see is, and I'm not making any judgment on this, but what we will see is mum might say, "Oh, I'll give you a lollipop if you stop that." So that's rewarding for control. So do we do that with ourselves, and do we do that with others? So it's sort of a bit of a subtle coercion, I suppose, in some ways. So if you do this, I will give you that. That's essentially.
I have noticed, though, in small business and others, and being a small business person myself, and you have with different hats, is that in some ways that's clear. It's transactional, our relationship between this customer and that person or that client and there, and subcontractors or suppliers of certain things. But it still comes into play because we're still human. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I think so. I think there's a very different thing for rewarding quality work and good behaviour.
Okay, yeah.
Very, very different thing. Yeah. So, if people have worked really hard all through the year and the boss gives them a reward by way of a cash incentive,
yeah,
that's very different, because that's more of a thank you, that's more of a gratitude.
Okay.
But it's this transaction where if you do this, I will give you that. You're never going to get the that unless you've done the if you do.
So what it could be therefore is that so the child, that pile of kids, might still get that chocolate and might not know it's coming, but has brought in the shopping, helped mum get it in the fridge, has then been rewarded with the chocolate.
Yeah, as long as we're
not being baited with it.
That's right, and it's a thing about, we want people to act from an intrinsic perspective.
Okay.
So that's a good thing to do to help mum.
Yes.
And I'm not saying, we all don't get cranky. Of course we do. We all get frustrated. Of course we do. But are we thinking about how we're reacting to our own internal feelings? So if we come to the connecting habits on the other side, so instead of criticising, we're going to be more accepting of ourselves, accepting of those around us. And we're not going to blame anymore. We're going to negotiate differences. What a boring world it would be if we were all exactly the same. It'd be beyond boring.
Absolutely.
But we can negotiate differences.
So I wanted to draw people's attention back to the 7 ways of well-being for small business. So in this regard, then, they literally use the connectedness of a chain for the icon of enhancing connectedness. So what we're actually talking about is actual quality connectedness.
Oh, absolutely. And we're talking about trusting people. We're talking about genuinely listening, not hearing, genuinely in the presence of the other, listening. We're talking about encouraging, respecting and supporting. Now, if we are enhancing connectedness in the workplace, we are engaging in these connecting habits.
Because in a sense, I'm just like the chain analogy, it's sort of the weakest link wrecks the rest, you know what I mean? And so it's in our best interests to ensure that other people's chain link is strong as ours.
Well, I think, and we're demonstrating.
By demonstrating,
yes.
by example setting.
That's exactly right. So if, as the employer, if I'm not wrapped up in blaming and nagging people, I'm more about let me listen and let me be more accepting. I'm more curious. I'm giving people an opportunity to have their voice heard. I am going to be in a really much safer, stress-less workplace where people are likely to be able to look after their well-being and their mental health, and productivity will automatically increase. And this is what the people in our booklet have said to us. They have said, when I've worked on connectedness, productivity just increases.
One thing that you'll touch on, because you just sort of mentioned it as we're preparing, about connecting habits, like what do we do now? You used the term negotiating differences. So you're saying negotiating as it's like a conversation, or it's an examination of it, reflection of it. There's certainly an amount of curiosity in that.
Oh, absolutely. When I've had to negotiate difference in a workplace, instead of getting into the blame game, which is, as I've said, quite useless, it's been able to be very clear about what my expectations are, understand the other person's understanding of my expectations and where they're coming from, and then genuinely listening to the reasoning they may have as to why what I'm asking may be better served doing it their way. So it's about really looking at and genuinely respecting people and trying to come to the common ground. The achievement of the goal has to happen. It's not as though you're saying, oh, well, it's, we won't worry about it. Of course we'll worry about it, but we'll do this in a positive way so it's a win-win for both parties. I get what I need done and the other person gets the opportunity to have their voice heard as to why what I'm asking may be done a little differently but achieve the same result.
And we very much a negotiation on a level playing field.
Yeah.
And certainly if you're setting the example, it rises that tide a bit.
Oh, it does. And it's also giving people the opportunity to be themselves and to not work themselves up into such a state of stress that they're so anxious when it comes time to have that conversation. It's pointless. It's really pointless.
Because you sort of worked up to a stress where you end up navigating it rather than, and that navigation is like a pinball machine. It's getting tossed from either side and other agendas that are already set in stone, and no one's going to move from their position.
That's right, and that's...
No one's done the initial negotiating.
That's right, and it's hopeless. It's a hopeless situation and it's a no-win. When I'm engaged in negotiating difference, I'm also understanding that the only behaviour I control is my own. So I have to be listening and respecting and supporting the other person to have their voice heard. We both know what the end game is. Does it really matter how we get there can often be the question.
So in a sense, we're not talking about being nice. You can be nice about it. We're not talking about negotiation skills. And those things can happen across a boardroom, or it can happen particularly with new clients or when there's industrial situations, but even across the kitchen table with the family. And most certainly in the mirror with yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Because, if I'm not encouraging, supporting and respecting myself, then it's really hard for me to negotiate the differences that are going on, the voices in my head about do this, don't do this, do that, don't do that, or you're this or you're that. I need to experience what's that is like with myself, because health and well-being start with me, so I have to do that, so that when I'm practicing it with someone else or working with someone else in that space, I understand, be in the presence of that person, genuinely listen to what they say. And at this point, the key between listening and hearing are two different things. If I am in a situation where I'm talking with someone, while they're speaking, I'm formulating the response in my head, I can't possibly be listening to what they're saying. And it's so important.
So let's just go back and recap. What it can be very different interpretations of what basic needs are. And as I said before, it's not earth, wind and fire. What are they, and what in this particular training and webcast are the things that mean the baseline of basic needs? What are they?
So what Dr. Glasser says is that you see in this slide. Dr. Glasser says all human beings have 5 basic needs. So one is safety and security, another is connection, one is fun, freedom, and the other one is significance. So if we talk about safety and security, people who have a high need for safety and security, they worry about how's my health, how's my living circumstances, am I safe, have I got enough money to pay the rent, food and water. Those are the sorts of things people think about. They're generally not risk takers, people who have a high safety and security need. If we talk about connection, we're talking about people who are really focused on friendship, cooperation, involvement, the caring, very caring people, relationships, trust. These are the people in a workplace situation who have the high connection need, where you will see in conversations around the workplace where they'll always be thinking about and looking out for how's everybody coping? Is everyone getting their voice heard? Is someone struggling? They'll always pick that up.
The one that brings the cake for the birthday
Yeah,
party.
always. Yeah, always, yes.
Always writes the card on behalf of
yes.
everyone. When
Thinks
leaves.
to do that. Absolutely.
Thinks to do that.
Yeah. Significance we're talking about here, where people very much have a high need for respect. It's not about them as being important, it's about their work is important. What they do and what they believe, their belief system to them is very important. Recognition and achievement so that they get things done. Courage, competence, the impact that they may have for more vulnerable groups of people.
It's interesting you say that, because the whole significance, it certainly touches certain groups in the community. You see this in the farming community. It's not just about the cattle and this property, it's my identity. You know, this business failing or succeeding on with the rest of my family in handing it over is identity more than just commerce. The same for our veteran community, the sense of I have this certain purpose, that's why I enlisted. Now what is my purpose? Or now this is my new purpose in small business. Or in a civvy street they call it. But it is jarring because I don't understand what other people value, especially when they don't seem to value anything. Yeah.
And I think if you have a high significance need, it's about you. And if in the example you've just given, that career is taken away and then I'm moving to something else, for a person in that space, and I can really relate to that, it is, well, what am I now? Where do I get my voice heard now? Where do I get to do the work that I value so much? It's really challenging in that space.
Yeah.
When we talk about people who have a high freedom need, it is, as it suggests, they like to have choices and they like to exercise those choices. They're creative, they're independent people, they like autonomy, very flexible, they like movement and they like options. So they're people who like to be really not tied down.
Sounds like me, Cathy, too.
Could well be, Adriel. And then
I'm not
people,
sure what you're suggesting.
people who have a very high fun need are people who have, they love enjoyment, they love the relaxation, they'll be the life of the party. They'll be the people in the workplace who'll always have a joke, and always see the lighter side of things.
It's interesting with that. Are they just doing that because they're extroverts, or they've got some other need for wanting to do that?
No, I think that the determination of that person is about they like to celebrate and they like to explore as well.
Yeah.
So what Dr. Glasser had said was that learning, fun was the generic reward for learning. Okay. So people who like to be exploring, that they have a need to learn. And I'm not talking about academic necessarily learning, but I'm talking about that new essence all the time of what's changing, what's happening.
Isn't that just a curiosity mindset?
Oh, it could be, but it's a very high need for these people, yes.
Okay, so it's intense.
Yeah, it can be.
And they're often the person helping someone do the
and they'll do the fun part.
They'll do the fun part.
Yep, they'll have the party.
Brought the cake.
Yep.
And maybe
Yeah.
take the credit
Yeah.
for it.
So even in that light description, you can see all of us have those needs. The strength of the needs is quite different. So, you know, we look at this about how strong is your coffee is a good example.
Oh, I saw this at the coffee shop this morning. You know,
Yes.
Like the personalities came out and the flavours people chose, and
Yeah.
you know, skinny lattes for people that, you know, interesting.
So when we do our needs assessment, what we do is we will all score in all of those levels.
Yeah.
But it's our primary need, which will be our highest score, and then you come down to your second need, third, fourth, fifth. Very often people's primary and then the next secondary will be very close. That's not uncommon. But for some people, their primary need will be really clear. The thing to think about needs in terms of families, friendship groups or workplaces particularly is we will have a mixture. Now, if you have, and it's quite common that you will have quite a reasonable number of people with a high connection need, and if the person who's leading that group has a high significance need, and then you've got people fun and freedom and safety and security, you really have to think about it because significance people can often be a bit task focused. So you really have to stop and think, now hang on a minute, if I'm seeing behaviour that's not quite as it should be or has been, then I need to stop and think, what am I doing and what's happening over here for those people? So am I not thinking enough about the connection in the group, in the cohort of work colleagues?
So are we talking in the sense of this slide that the triple shots and the strongs, they're very focused, even to the point of aggression. We need to be on task.
Oh, well, this is about the triple shot and the strong. This is about my needs.
Yeah.
So what's my highest need? That'll be probably a triple
Of course.
shot. Yeah.
So what you're saying in the sense of those moving around within the workplace is that it's about being aware enough
Yes.
to understand why other people are not on that task as much as you are.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And saying everybody doesn't think like me,
Yeah.
thankfully. I need to be ensure that there's connection for the people who have the connection. Where's the safety and security? A really good example for safety and security with people with significant high need who often like change. People with a high safety and security need don't like change.
Yeah.
So you need to know, if I want that message to filter, I have to be saying, okay, I'll give you this information. I'd like you to look at it. I'd like you to think about it and formulate your views and opinions on it. Next week, we're going to have a meeting to discuss that.
So you're designing the response, not the reaction.
Exactly. And I'm saying, I understand change is difficult for you. I'll give you some time to think about
So
it.
if we go right through back to the other spectrum, those that are totally opposite to those that are
Yes.
in that command and control framework, we've got the task, we can see the flag, let's race to it. Get out of my way. What about the others that are moseying in as it would be perceived?
Look, I think the main thing that I've learned is, so my highest need is one of significance, very quickly and very closely followed by freedom.
Okay.
So for me, what I learnt very, very quickly was I need to think a lot about the people who have the connection and the safety and security needs, particularly because we're almost polar opposites.
Yeah.
So I need to think about that. Freedom, not such a problem. Fun, I needed to think about there needs to be fun in this workplace to keep people engaged.
So you're in your own head negotiating difference.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
And I'm understanding it and thinking, how can I give everybody a fair go? Everybody's needs have to be met. Nobody's needs can be met at the expense of anybody else's.
It's interesting you say that because in the sense that you've interpreted and you've negotiated even with yourself what you're going to do with it, in fact being that staunch whatever, you might actually be able to implement the cohesiveness quicker than others.
Oh,
'Cause
absolutely.
the others were like, oh, if you want to,
Yeah.
if it's okay.
Yeah.
Whereas you're like, no, we're going to all work together and this is how we're going to do it. And
Well, yeah.
this is when we're going to have fun and this is when we're not. And
Well, and
all
when
those
I'm saying it's okay. It's okay to have fun. It's okay, but am I ensuring everybody is in an environment where their needs will be met is so important. And the other thing I'll say is, generally speaking, the level of your needs doesn't change much once you get into, past teenage years. However, if something really dramatic and you sort of get a shock in your life, your significant need could be threatened. So, for example, for someone with a significant need, very often safety and security is quite low. But if something happened and they lost their job out of the blue, then what would jump up would be, oh my, safety and security can jump up. But once things settle and you've had time to go through, where you're at and what you're doing, things settle down again. But so we can be shocked and we can have things that are very unexpected happen in our life, and one of the needs that we've never thought was terribly important to us raises its head.
I want to pick you up on that just quickly, because that is one of the things that connects particularly these two projects and us as individual as leaders in our own right in this webcast, is that shock wave, that moving up and down or side to side, is often what brings people to a point of distress. That point of distress, particularly in things that happen in the world, we don't have to mention what they are, because it could be something else tomorrow. There'll always be something, that's what I'm saying. Is that level of stress and the shockwave from it itself can be a learning, cathartic experience enough for there to be some learning and some movement and some negotiation of that. Even if something does move up and we move back, it doesn't have to be a thing that breaks the deal.
Oh no, and I would say, adding to what you've said, that is probably one of the most valuable learning opportunities that you can have in your life, because once you work out where you're at in the situation and you're calm, take some deep breaths and really get insightful and start to do some self-evaluation, you can start to see it's not as often as bad as you thought it initially was, and what else can you do? So you start to broaden your horizons a little bit, and that's really useful.
I wanted to refer back to the 7 ways, because number 7 in there, a key number, because it usually wouldn't go over 7 for things that people will remember or not, is about supporting someone in distress. And sometimes that's the person in the mirror, particularly if you're being the leader of that enterprise and there's really no one else to talk to. If that's the case, what is it we're going to front up, and what are we going to do to negotiate, in that case, that shockwave or the recalibration to a better place, a different basic need?
I think in that's a very, very true situation, and a lot of people who lead organisations, and particularly self-employed people, and particularly sole traders, often find themselves in that position. What I have done in my lifetime is taken the time to really go back to the connecting behaviours again, and really trusting my instinct. So I'm a gut person. So if I'm making decisions and my gut's uneasy, if I'm listening and I'm insightful, I'll go, maybe that's not the best decision.
But isn't that instinct based on, therefore, some collective, for want of a better word, wisdom on the situation, rather than a fear position from your gut?
Oh, yeah, most certainly.
You might feel the same.
Yeah, no, it's I can recognise, not with fear, this is maybe not.
It might physically feel the same, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, yes, it might. But it might be that I'm going to say, maybe I better rethink that.
Yeah.
Get some different options. I think there is an element of wisdom that you gather with age and experience, but also this to me has come from education and learning and practice. And I think when we talk about the number 7 in the booklet, sitting with someone in distress, one of the most powerful things you can do is be comfortable with silence. Sometimes people don't want you to say anything, and as a leader you may not need anybody to say anything, you just need someone to be there.
I think one of the key take-homes from this particular workshop webcast is seemingly time to reflect. The time to reflect in the space in which it creates then creates a curiosity that's clean and clear to be able to do the things you need to do to unpack this.
Oh, I think so. And understanding the key to it, if we go back to mental health and wellbeing is everyone's responsibility, but it starts with me. Once I understand what my needs are, my primary need, being the most significant need for me, then I can understand how I interact. Then I can start to observe others and how they interact, and then I can make sure that there's opportunity for everyone to have their needs met. That's what's really
I
important.
do reflect on some of our collective work in particular in suicide prevention, is that so much of what we've been working on the last 20 years is about stigma reduction, and some of that stuff has been busted. Then what do we do now? What I have found particularly interesting, and I understand more of it now from understanding this particular workshop and webcast, is so that's happened to us, that distress, or in the case the trauma and the shockwave from it, what do I do with that new information? Will it define me, or will I therefore unpack it enough to pursue a life that's doesn't have to be thriving, it certainly has to be comfortable, and it certainly doesn't have to be repetitive and re-triggering.
And I think one of the key questions we can ask ourselves is, if I do or say that, will it bring me closer to what I want or take me further away? So I can be a little bit conscious, should I hold my tongue? Because if I'm going to get into a blame game, it'll take me further away from the relationship, whether it's with myself or others, than where I really want to be. I found that a very powerful question to ask myself.
So Cathy, we're going to explore about creating positive relationships in the next webcast, the next chapter. So we're really talking about creating a positive working relationship with yourself, what that means, it's different for different people, and then what it does with your team and your group. To see what's up next in this series of webcasts.
Thank you, Adriel.